It's a pleasure to introduce this morning's featured speaker, Mr. Luke Spikes. Mr. Spikes is a data industry veteran and serial entrepreneur who has been building and running decision support businesses for the better part of 25 years. In his time, he's led teams working for the world's leading technology companies, supported Europe's biggest media and telecom businesses, and has spent the past 10 years actively addressing the data and analytics needs of government and educational institutions in the United States and in the UK. Today, Luke leads two data-centric businesses, Spikes Cavell Analytics, which equips higher education institutions and public agencies with the actionable business intelligence they need to better manage external spending, measure relative performance, and deliver citizen access to data that is complete, relevant, and meaningful, and easier to understand. And he runs Zanatic. It's a data strategy and analytics consulting firm dedicated to helping its clients extract real and tangible value from their data. Known for his informative, entertaining, and occasionally provocative presentations, today Luke is going to talk about the search for hidden insights in big data. He'll make the case for exploiting spend data and analytics to deliver the evidence-based insight essential for the design and execution of winning cooperative purchasing. Luke?
Good morning. I'd better be good after that, hadn't I? My name's Luke Spikes. Strange name, I appreciate. Strange accent, I understand that. If I do use the odd word that you completely don't understand, we do have an interpreter on hand just in case. I'm delighted to be here, and one of the things that, you know how you sometimes places and sounds and smells evoke memories of times past? As I walked up, it was the Student Union building, and I thought, you know what, I haven't been in the Student Union building for many years, and I had a flashback. Unfortunately, I can't tell you what that flashback was, because it's a business and sort of family audience. Needless to say, I was doing the things that we thought were a good idea when we were young. I overcame that. I have arrived. And because it is an academic institution and this is an academic audience, I thought it only fair to warn you of two things. One, there will be a blizzard of numbers. Two, there will be a test. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to divide the room into two halves, and I'm going to decide which half has done better at the test than the other. We need competition. This is America after all. And then what I will also do is I've done a few presentations and recorded in my head a league table of memorable statistics recalled by the audience test. I will rank you relative to every other group of institutions to whom I've ever done a presentation. If I am very, very, very quiet, you did woefully. If I'm very noisy and animated, you did very well and you're at the top of the class. Now, one small and final point. This is to do with the administration of the event. I was asked to sign media release forms. To be honest, I've never done that before. Had a look and realized, in fact, this was being filmed. And Eric, who asked me to sign the form, may not have noticed that I made a manuscript amendment in the margin, which basically said, that's fine, provided you only ever film me from my best side. Now, this being California, I had a quick look, and there is an app for that. And so when you watch, if you decide to watch, if you haven't had enough by the time I'm done, the video of the event afterwards, if I appear to be moving around, then clearly the app worked. If I completely disappear, I obviously have no best side. Now, when we were talking about what might we do, how might we articulate and make data interesting, Mike, Tom, and I sat down, and we scoped out an agenda, and we thought that would be a really interesting thing to do. And you know what? When I was putting the material together, I thought that would be the most boring thing I could possibly inflict on you in the history of mankind. So I'm not going to do what Mike thinks I'm going to do. What I'm actually going to do is start with a negative. I am not an expert in higher education. I once went. I have 2 of my 4 children in higher education, so I know how much it costs. But beyond that, I am not an expert in higher education. What I am, what we are experts in data. Now, it's one of those things that when you say that at a dinner party, what it gets you is instant eyes looking for the nearest exit. Let's be honest, it's not the best and most effective introduction when you're discussing what it is you do with others. However, we know stuff about data. We also know a thing or two about procurement. But data alchemist somehow sounds better. So that's what we are. That's what I am. I'm a data alchemist. And it makes us appear way more interesting on Twitter. So, numbers. $500 billion US. I may or may not indicate when there is a number that will appear in the test later. You're going to have to guess. $500 billion US. That is a big number. It just so happens to be the actual amount of spend by government bodies that in 10 years, my small band of geeks, data scientists, analysts, and the like have taken, have transformed, and turned into something that is fit for purpose and useful if you are a decision maker in the public sector trying to figure out how you make best use of the money you spend. Now that is a lot of Benjamin Franklin's. And as Mike did say, and the one thing that I have retained is a desire to ensure that this is educational. So what I thought I would do is go measure a $100 bill, 6.14 inches by 2.61 inches. You may also not be able to instantly recall that there are 63,360 inches in a mile. You may also not know, unless you happen to be, or your first degree was astronomy or similar, that the moon is 238,855 miles from Earth. Now, why is this remotely relevant? Well, you know, it just appeared to me when I look at data, I find things interesting that other people cannot comprehend why I would find that interesting. But as I'm up here and I'm in charge, I'm going to inflict these things upon you. If I took $500 trillion or $500 billion US, and I laid the Benjamin Franklin's, the $100 bills, end to end, I would create a paper pathway that would travel to the moon, and it would allow a small rodent. I did look on the internet to establish how wide a mouse was, because I wanted to figure that it wasn't going to fall off, given it's only 2.61 inches wide. Amazingly, that piece of information does not exist. However, stick with me, small rodent. And it could come back. So we wouldn't have left this small rodent in the outer atmosphere to perish. We would have provided a mechanism to actually return. A lot of money. A couple more numbers for you. You'll notice we like precision. And I have a few numbers that actually go to 2 decimal places. This one, I've decided, let's round it up. $9,026,521,520. That's how much spend from academic institutions in the US we have cleansed, categorized, and processed for 119 data sets. So some of the numbers I'm going to share today with you, some of the blizzard of data is going to be derived very specifically from an analysis of expenditure that relates and should relate to every one of you in the audience today. But, so what? We could send a mouse to the moon and back, and we got a very big number that begins with 9. Well, there's another number for you. Why so what? So what is because in 10 years, we have witnessed remarkable transformations occur by organizations, institutions, and public bodies seeking to change the way they procure goods and services and using evidence, data, and insight so to do. 1.9 billion. That's in the test, by the way. You might remember that one. $1.9 billion. What is that? That number is the sum total that the nation of Scotland has saved to date since deciding in 2006 that they would seek to get visibility across the entire country. Now, do we have any Scots in the audience today? No, that's good. Because I'm about to upset them. If you're in Scotland, the Scots will tell you this is a big country. I can't do a Scottish accent, by the way. I won't even attempt it. It's a big country. Actually, it's quite small. When you take the total expenditure on goods and services for the entire country of Scotland in the course of the year, it will be about the same as the amount that the UC system, the CSU system, and the community colleges in California spend in aggregate. Now, either you spend a lot, or they don't, or vice versa. But the point is, as an exercise in helping you understand why this is potentially valuable, we have a direct and highly relevant example. They have 160 entities, different sizes, different levels of maturity, different types of resources. There are, 112 community colleges, 23 campuses, the Office of the Chancellor, 10 entities within the UC system. In other words, about the same size, turns out. So it's $1.9 million worth of reasons as to why data and the big numbers I presented earlier might provide us with a route forward, given the goal of this particular audience is to figure out how we can make best use of what I'll refer to as the common dollar across the three systems. Now, out of that work, and with their benefit of hindsight, I suppose, the Scots will tell you that unless you know how much you spend on what and with whom, any plan you have to transform the way you spend, procure goods and services to save money, and let's not forget improve efficiencies. It's not always about saving money. It's about driving transformation and change for the good of the institution. Will be at best a guess. At worst, it'll just be suboptimal. Now, I'd like to try and paint pictures for you. Anyway, do we have any mariners here? Anyone own a boat? Anyone own a rowing dinghy? Okay, one. So I'd like for you to come on a little journey for me. Imagine that our opportunities were a collection of islands. Contracts that we might negotiate for the benefit of all is an island. Inefficiencies we might make that drive, say, reduce the number of transactions we have to administer is another island. So imagine that there's this collection of little islands. Imagine that where we are is another island, and we're stood in the port of here. What we're trying to do is get from the port of here to the islands of there. Now, it clearly helps to know where we are, to know where we're trying to get to, because that will then give us the best possible chance of navigating from the port of here to the islands of there. Now, we only have one individual who's put his hand in the air. It does assume we have a boat. It does look like this journey is going to be in Tom's rowing dinghy. Okay, there clearly is only going to be room for about 4 of us. So what that actually means is we need to be very careful that what we do is pick the right islands to visit in the right order at the right time. So if I said to you, my plan, these are paper documents, they're all blank. The first plan or the first analysis says the port of here, and there's a question mark, because we don't actually know where we are. My second document is the islands of there. We have no idea what the opportunities are. We think we might, but we have no idea. My third document is my boat. Who here will bet me $100 that that is not going to be a very frustrating journey, ultimately destined for disappointment and failure. If I said to you, here is a sat navigation, best in the world, start somewhere, go somewhere, but I didn't tell you where the start was or the end was, or how you're going to get there, it's not going to help. So data can help. The right data, purposely analyzed, will tell you where you are, your current position. It'll tell you which islands you should be heading for, your opportunities. It will evidence the need for a bigger boat than the one that Tom can give us. We can now walk into the Chancellor's office, whoever's office is the appropriate office to walk into, and say, here is my evidence. I need an ocean-going liner about the size of the Titanic, but if it could be a bit more robust and not hit an iceberg, that would be great. And it would take the guesswork out of the navigation. We are not in the 14th, 15th centuries. We are able to make use of data to figure out how it is we get from the port of here to the islands of there. Now, I know all of you in the audience are saying, that's cool, that's good. We spent a ton of money on our financial management and ERP system. We were led to believe that it would deliver the answer to life, the universe, and everything. Now, for those of you in the audience who, any Douglas Adams fans? Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, okay. The answer, you needn't have spent that money on your ERP systems, because I can tell you the answer is 42. And I will tell you that for free. If you wish, however, to give me $20 million to implement and tell you the answer, I can do that too. I digress. The information in your finance systems will suit your purposes for financial planning, management, and reporting, but for procurement, well, not quite. And bear in mind that what we're talking about today is how we go about addressing more effective cooperation, and one of the facets of that is the money we spend on goods and services. So not quite. Well, not at least as far as procurement is concerned. Now, I can't stand before you without offering up at least some evidence. And so, what I can tell you first is that your data, for procurement purposes, is unlikely to be appropriately categorized. It will be incomplete, and it will be spread across multiple systems. All of those things represent big challenges. And let me illustrate. You'll have, we might call them subjective codes. You'll have a way of describing the expenditure in your systems, and you'll apply those codes to the systems. Sometimes they have multiple levels. It might be about cost centers, directors, that sort of stuff. We know that. We all have that. And during the course of running of the institution, for financial reporting purposes, you will allocate the money you spend to one or more of those codes. So what I thought I'd do is take a quick look, and this is, when I say institution, by the way, this is not an institution in California. Just be clear about that. I don't want to get myself into trouble. But when you said, let us take a look at the subjective codes, take all of those codes that are to do with information technology, and run a report across our bazillion-dollar finance system to get the answer. And the answer that comes back is 11,318,758.50. I did tell you we like precision. Fine, we say. That's how much we spend, and these are the categories in which we spend that money. We've got software license fees, makes sense. Telecom services, OK. Equipment networking, yeah, OK. Computer repairs, well, I'm not quite sure what that is. Computer hardware, how's that different from maintenance? Not quite sure about that. Computer, what's that? Computer, do you know what? I'm not actually sure that I truly understand from those descriptions what it is being purchased. For budgeting and finance and allocating against your financial report, fine. For procurement, not fine. And let me give you a very graphic illustration of why that is not fine. Because I then took the same institution's data, where we had ignored the classifications that had been applied to it, where we had applied classifications to the expenditures, one of the things that we do, very boring, very dull, but very necessary. And I ran the same report, and I got 30,077,644.68 cents. spent on things that we might reasonably consider to be purchases of the related technology. I've got that's very small, you can't really see it. But the point is, what we thought, based on the information in our finance system, was a spend on ICT is, in fact, 2.66 times higher when we look at it a different way with a slightly more procurement orientation to what it is we've purchased. What I can then do, of course, is if you're looking to figure out how you can ultimately transform the coding and classification and systems at source, you can now say, so show me all that spend, and then list for me the codes we've applied to it. So I thought I would do that for no other reason than it makes interesting reading, and it gives me the opportunity to do this, which I think is really neat. OK? 2.66. So there is an idiom. It says, what you don't know can't hurt you. Sorry, I don't believe that to be the case. I'll come back to that in a sec. What you don't know can hurt you. But even if you said to me, do you know what? Our systems are the best systems on the universe. Our coding, our classification is so brilliant, there is not any way that anyone could poke a hole in it. I would say that's fine. Fantastic. Well done. But then I would say, hang on a minute, though. You are part of a group. My guess is that the other constituent elements in the group are not the same level as you. So if you're talking about cooperation, collaboration, and figuring out how you can do things together, it stands to reason that the information you have is consistent across all of the organizations you're trying to bring together in a group. It won't be. But even more than that, given that what we're talking about here is a collective effort across 3 systems, another level up, I can guarantee you, I've been very careful. I'm British, right? So we're not too provocative, despite the introduction. So I've gone, it probably won't. But just so you know, that when we Brits say it probably won't, means it absolutely certainly will. OK? It won't be standardized between the 3 systems. So we have a problem. Bear in mind, we're trying to go from the port of here to the islands of there in a boat that's fit for purpose. We don't stand a chance, as it currently stands, on figuring that out other than by guesswork at the moment. So unless you know how much you spend, so what you don't know can hurt you. It can hurt you because in our illustration, if you were sitting there seeking to forge contracts that would deliver the best possible price and terms for the organization supplying you with technology, you would have missed 425 organizations with whom this organization was currently spending $18.5 million a year. That is as good as turning up at the holiday shop 4 weeks before Christmas and expecting a discount. By the way, I only use that example because I was in Sausalito, just a little, having a look around. And there was a shop selling Christmas trees in August, and it was open. That did not compute with me. However, they were very fancy Christmas trees. I did think about buying one and having it shipped back, but I thought, that's a bit much. The point is, if you don't have a contract, you're paying list price. Thank you, Tom. That is one of the things that Tom, for me, is a little anecdote that I'm going to repurpose and I use often. It's as good as paying list price. Who here, when the spend is billions of dollars annually, expects to pay list price? I can guarantee you are. Guarantee you are. Because we do not have the answers to key questions that transition the benefit of that information to us from the supplier or the vendors. And I'm not suggesting it needs to be adversarial, and I'm not suggesting all the suppliers that you have are mean and evil and conniving. I'm just saying that it presently stands, you have a disadvantage. And therein lies a very graphic example of that disadvantage. You are paying too much for goods and services. So, who has children here? Who has young children? Everyone heard of Bob the Builder? Yeah, I had to check to see whether you had it. Mine are over here. Mine are 23, 21, 16, and 15. So if you want to know why I spend 2 weeks a month in the US, there is it. Bob says, can we fix it? What's the answer? Yes, we can. Can we fix it? Yes, we can. Now, it's a bit small, but what it basically says is, that's what we do. Okay? It's what we do. We've been doing it for 10 years. We do it for the California State University system. I've been doing that for 3 years. We do it for another 70-odd institutions in the US. We do it for another 200-odd in the UK. Okay? So yeah, it can be fixed. Getting it fixed is no longer excuse. Saying, oh, it's too possible, our data's in bad shape, and it would just take us a huge effort to run a report out the system. It's not an excuse. The question, however, isn't can you fix it? It's should you fix it? You've got lots of things to do. You've got lots of priorities to set. You've got lots of things to do with relatively little resources. You always have to figure out what is it you do, and perhaps more importantly from time to time, what is it you don't do. So should we fix it? Well, I've got some numbers for you. Now, this is test territory, I should have warned you. We are now about to enter a blizzard of data. And what I'm going to seek to try and do is confuse you all. No, I'm not. That's not true. What I'm going to try and do is make a case, which if you remember was the little description at the beginning of the presentation, make a case as to why you need data and why the data has to be the right data in the right shape for the purpose. So I've done a little bit of analysis. Can't help it, I love data. So what I did, with the permission of Tom, was a little bit of analysis of spend in the California State University system, because we have, for the last 3 years, captured, transformed, and made available and joined up, and all the things that we do for all the 23 campuses in the Office of Chancellor. So I've got some data. I thought it might be helpful to share that with you. I have made categorical reassurances to Tom and to Mike and everyone else, and anyone else who's from the CSU system, that I will not embarrass anyone today. Well, at least not intentionally. 65.78% of the CSU spend across 23 campuses in the Office of the Chancellor is with vendors who supply at least 2 of those 24 entities. The spend I am referring to is $1.2 billion and 75 cents. So what that means is, if we just convert that into, we are talking about $800 billion spent just by the CSU each year with vendors who are selling services to at least 2 of the campuses and or the Office of the Chancellor. What we call commonality, instance commonality. Now, does it mean that you're buying the same things from those vendors? No, of course not. Does it mean that you're not buying things from other vendors? Of course. But as a place to start, it gives us an indication that there's a fair amount of common spend. Now, some of you will go, yes, but that's not precise enough. OK, that's fine. How's that for precision? What this chart does, it's a little bit difficult to see. It says from left to right, here's how much we spend with a single entity, so of all the vendors for the entire system. This is how much the first column is spent with just one vendor, so single instance. Right at the other end is the expenditure, how many vendors supply all 24. The bit that I'm interested in is the bit towards the far end. So if I said, let's just look at all of those who supply 10 or more of the group, any one of us in this audience, particularly those who's interested in the business of supply, the business of services, and getting those for the best possible price, would probably sit there and say, I'd fancy my chances if I knew that, of getting some improved terms that would deliver savings. 6 organizations supply all 24 and generate nearly $70 million in revenues. Do you not think that that might not be an interesting place to start figuring out whether or not a little bit of leverage might not result in better terms for all? It may not. There could be a whole host of reasons as to why not. But until we look, until we turn over stones, we don't know where the islands of opportunity lie. So if I turn that into some numbers rather than a chart, nearly 20% of the spend is with vendors who supply at least 10 for the CSU. That's a nearly $250 million opportunity. And we have to view it as an island of opportunity that relates specifically to driving better terms for vendors who are supplying multiple campuses And it's worth $250 million, is probably therefore worth visiting in our boat. Probably worth visiting in a slightly bigger boat than Tom's rowboat. If I, and I'm very cautious doing this, by the way, but it helps to illustrate. If I said I'm going to take that $234 million, and I'm just going to try and assess what the potential return is to me simply in money or cash saved, I've just done a little table of potential ranges. And it shows us that, at one end, at one extreme, you could argue that 10%, it depends how tough a negotiator are, isn't extreme, but let's assume that that's extreme. That's a $23 million opportunity. How many students would that educate? I don't know, by the way. It's a rhetorical question. No, it isn't. Put it in your test. Go write that down, get online, and figure that one out. At the very least, it's a couple of $1 million. Now, you may argue, you know what, 2 million? Chump change. Not interested. I suspect not. If I then said, let's look at the categories, this is where we start to reveal things, you will have made assumptions. You will all make it. We will. It's a natural human thing to do about the places where we think we spend more, where we spend more with common vendors, and where the islands of opportunity might be. Well, it turns out that there probably are in areas that you would have maybe guessed at before. So information technology, utilities and energy, office supplies, business support services, laboratory. So they're all in areas that you may have already guessed. The trouble is, the opportunity we have now is we don't have to guess, we know. Now, I've just picked the top 5. There are going to be a ton of other categories as well, of course, which may not be so obvious to us. But in other words, we start now to get to a point where we can begin to focus on whether going after this particular island is worth it. We're getting a better idea of what's going to be on the island before we arrive. That means our plans, our preparation, and our approach can be more consistent with a positive landing rather than crashing into the rocks. One other thing pops out of this, to me anyway, because it's the sort of thing that happens when I look at numbers, and that's this. Over on the right-hand side, these are the categories, and it just shows you the percent of spend, but also the percent of transactional volume. In other words, if you get how many invoices you get, in effect, or coupons as you might refer to them. Shows me that when I look at office supplies, and perhaps you may not be unreasonable, but 5.7% is the percent of total, but it represents nearly 15% of the transactions, the bits of paper, the administrative costs associated with it. So even though we were looking at it from which are the categories, let's give ourselves a quick look of which is a good island to visit, something else comes up. And this is what happens when you have data that's fit for purpose in the right form and you purposefully analyze it. In other words, you're looking for opportunity. And what will happen is once you have the data to hand is you will generate a lot of islands to visit. The next challenge after that then, of course, is assessing which of those islands you visit in which order and which ones you don't bother to visit at all. But you cannot do that unless what you have is the data to hand that at least helps you to size the opportunity, establish what resources might be required, net the two off together and say, you know what, our return is X. Simple thing. Businesses will do that. We will do that all the time. Well, I don't think there's any reason we shouldn't do that with procurement. So, 19.4, are you writing these down, by the way? I guess obviously there is a test. 19.41% is the spend common to at least 10 campuses. 64, we've already established. 65% is the spend of two groups. But if I take a look at ICT, technology in its broadest sense, 50% of the CSU's $206 million spend is actually with ICT vendors that supply at least 10. So I'm just gathering some evidence to establish whether or not this category might be worthy. And I appreciate this is super high level, and we'll always get down to the detail and who the vendors are and what you're buying. I understand that. But what we need to do first is to at least narrow the places we begin our looking. If I then look to that in the terms of, if 65% was all the goods and services I buy was spent with 2 or more vendors, in ICT, it's 81%. So in other words, there is a higher instance of commonality across the board in this category. And imagine if we then did that for every category. What will we have? We would have a list of islands in rank order, potentially worth visiting. Would we have to do more work? Of course we'd have to do more work. But at least what we now can do is work systematically from the top on the things that appear to be likely to contribute the biggest return for our investment of time, money, and effort. Now, so if I said, Just take the ICT spend. It's $104 million, 10 or more vendors. Let's apply a little, what would the savings be? It's a $10 million opportunity at one end, $1 million at the other. In other words, this one category appears to represent almost 45% of the total opportunity. This is a big island. This is one worth sending a few people in, having a bit of scurrying around, looking at contracts, doing all sorts of stuff that you will need to do to scale. Do you have any military or ex-military? I'm hoping we don't have any military in here today, because that would worry me. I've already seen a policeman outside with a rather large gun, and that's not good for us Brits. We get very nervous. Any ex-military? Okay, a few. You know, you get reconnaissance, right? That's all we're talking about. Know thine enemy better than you know yourself. Makes sense. What does the island look like? We better know what it looks like before we land on it, because I don't want to send the wrong equipment and the wrong troops. And I know it's probably inappropriate in an academic setting to apply a military analogy to procurement, but why not? Why do we persist in not having to hand the tools, the equipment, the resources that require us to go to battle and increase our chances of winning? Isn't this all about winning? So enough of that. Now, we have some community colleges here today, I believe. Yes, we do. Now, I've been talking about CSU. Same, by the way, would apply to UC. We just don't have their data. Question, yeah, but wait, community college is different. Of course, in some respects, different. But you know what? In others, absolutely the same. And we might have a perspective, we might have a view that has been established based upon a position that's sort of qualitative. What I'm interested in is not qualitative, I'm interested in quantitative. Show me the money. Show me where the dollars are, and then we'll decide whether it's different or not. And what I can tell you, a little bit grubbing around, the community colleges, 72 districts, collectively spend around about $1 billion on goods and services. That was almost as much as the CSU. Admittedly distributed across 112 campuses, 72 districts, but it's still a significant chunk of money. If I then said, and let's look at that based upon the top 10 spenders, the top 20, this is districts, not campuses at this moment. If we get to the top 40, that's 80% of the spend on goods and services. So although cooperation and collaboration sort of assumes like a group hug, right? A collective group hug. You have some pretty long arms to get around everyone in California, but the group hug can be done. Let's hug you first and then you second. Or, sorry, I'm not going to hug you at all because I'm busy hugging over here. In other words, if we have the data to hand, we can make sensible business decisions about where our priorities are, where our priorities should lie, who we include and who we don't include. And that's not about being exclusive. It's about what's the right thing to do with the data at the right time. And if I took the category, now how I've done this, by the way, because I was only able to get data for the community colleges from the fiscal data extract, which of course isn't granular enough. It's, it's pretty much the rough guess of what's in the bucket of other stuff beyond faculty, staff, and what have you. What I have done is I've gone to all the other community colleges for whom we have processed data and looked at that to see whether we can't use that as a sort of proxy. You know, we might argue that a university is different from a community colleges, but we're probably not going to argue that community college 1 is radically different from community college 2. So what I did was I said, let's take a look at the community colleges that we've got. And what I was able to do was then look at that from a, what might that $1 billion be reasonably distributed across in terms of categories? And then what I did is I said, and I wonder how that compares to the CSU. Do we have a profile that's so fundamentally different that it's quite clear there is no room for collaboration in procurement? Or do we have something that in some places is close enough to at least suggest that the same islands of opportunity that exist for CSU, exist for the community colleges, exist for UC? And it's a bit small, but construction is the top. And what you've got here, by the way, are averages for community colleges and then averages for all universities. So this is beyond the CSU now. Construction. You spend less on construction, but you still spend a chunk of money on construction. You spend about the same on IT as a percentage of the total. You spend more, in fact, on financial services, a lot more on facilities management, that may be the fact you spend half as much on buildings. Maybe you've got older buildings or something that require a bit more work to maintain, I don't know. But there's a difference there. And on and so it goes. Now, this is just the top 10. What I'm going to do now is share with you the numbers for the other 545 categories that we use. No, I'm not. Yeah. What I did was I said, no, let's do it a different way. Let's look at creating a ratio, simple ratio. Where does a community college spend more, less, or about the same? Which categories are we therefore looking at? And it turns out that in financial services, facilities management, human resources, and other goods and services, you spend more. In construction, laboratory, food and beverage, professional services, that might be, hey, we don't spend so much on consultants. You spend less. But in these categories, IT, utilities and energy, business support services, marketing and media, vehicles, office supply, security equipment, you spend about the same. Now, is this the answer to life, universe, and everything? No. Is this an absolute route plan to an island? No. But is it a good place to start? Yes. Now, the very, very sharp-eyed amongst you will have already noticed that the categories I selected and showed you that were the categories where the CSU spends more money with common vendors happen to appear there. Now, what does that lead me to begin to conclude? We're talking about hidden insights. We couldn't have known all this unless we had the data to at least begin to even make the hypothesis or the speculation. What it tells me is, yes, there of course are going to be differences, but let's not focus on differences, let's focus on the sames. Let's focus on the things that appear to be the same, because that's likely to produce for us an island that we can visit together. Now, I appreciate community colleges, the CSU, UC, you may all want to go in different boats. That's fine. But if we're all headed in different boats to the same island, unless we crash into one another on the way and we all drown, which is possible, of course, we're going to arrive at the same island and we're going to fight the same battle together. And my understanding is that this conference is all about together. Together, everyone achieves more. Well, this is about procurement's contribution to together. And I believe that there are places where it makes sense. So what I then did was I said, OK, well, let's do the same little bit of analysis. What proportion of the community college, so carve out CSU, what proportion of the community college's expenditure is with vendors common to at least 2 campuses? And I got a number of 43.94%. I know the sharp amongst you who have already written this down because you know it's in the test will know that that's about 2/3 of what it was for the CSU. So 1 or 2 will be going, see, it's different, told you. Until I tell you that the difference is comprised of analysis. This is common spending with common vendors in common categories for New Jersey, Ohio, can't you see that? South Carolina, Texas, Arizona. If I was to take a road trip, the road trip distance between those campuses for whom I've analyzed that data will be 5,681 miles. That should dispel the notion that there is only a geographic focus on commonality. There isn't. And I would hazard a guess, I will place you a Ben Franklin or 2 on the fact that if we took all the data from the 112 campuses that make up the community colleges of California, and we did what we do with them and then analyzed it, I'll put $500, maybe 1,000, at odds of 10 to 1. Anyone, any takers? That the number for community colleges will be similar to the number for the CSU in terms of common spent. So my next question is, forget all that, because cooperative purchasing will disadvantage our local, small business, or minority vendors. So as a consequence of that, I am going to do nothing, because I do not want to run the risk of the headline in the local Berkeley Times. That's where I'm staying, by the way, at the moment. Berkeley here, I would upset anyone. I don't even know is it the Berkeley Herald? I don't know what it is. Whatever the local paper is going, my business was ruined by. Okay? We want to avoid that. That's not a good thing. chancellors and provosts and all that sort of stuff. Don't like that sort of stuff. So what we need to do is think about this. Now, unfortunately, absence of information usually results in what? Inaction. If we don't know and it's risky, we probably don't do. So knowing, we come back to knowing, we're coming back to having the data. Because although that statement is an absolute categoric possibility, if you have data, you can begin to navigate through and make sure that you account for minority, policy, preferences, whatever it happens to be in the procurement of your goods and services. Here's a couple of numbers for you. These are in the test. I said, take all community colleges. How much do they spend as a proportion of spend in the local community? And we define local as a certain distance from the institution itself. For community colleges, it's 28%. So 28% of the spend will go to businesses that live and reside within a defined distance from the institution. For universities, it's 17, 18%. So community colleges do notionally do a better job of supporting the local economy, except I would look at the other way around and say 72% of the spend for a community college is somewhere else. That's 3 times the size of the number that's spent locally. So we're looking at the wrong thing. We need to account for the fact, but we don't need to have that fact dictate every action that follows thereafter. We need to look at things a different way. And then I did another one. I said, well, small business. I don't know if you have preferences or you just have policies, but there is definitely a requirement to measure how much is spent with small minority businesses. So I just took the small and medium-sized businesses. Community colleges spend about half their money with small and medium businesses. That's less than 250 employees, by the way. That's about the same as the universities. Now, bear in mind that these numbers are not derived from tracking by trying to marry registered businesses. This says all businesses, because, by the way, just I should qualify. One of the assets that we have to available is 50-odd million businesses in our Experian data sets. So we know how many people they employ. So when we're joining these 2 sets of data, and I forgot to tell you, we join to external sources of data. So now we can say, regardless of what it says in your systems and your tracking and anything else, let's take an independent perspective of spend by looking at who you spend with, how many people are employed, just doing the math. Well, it comes out that you spend a lot more than I think you probably do. That's a question or point for another day. The point here was a simple one, though. With the information to hand, the right data to hand, what we can do is make some sensible decisions because those decisions are informed. Maybe we avoid a category which is very skewed towards local suppliers. Maybe we avoid a category which is very skewed to difficult suppliers. We all have them. We all know that there's one supplier in our roster of suppliers. If we upset them, it's going to go, all the way up to the top. But if we know this, we know where they are, and we're looking at our islands of opportunity, our reconnaissance now says, avoid that bush, because over in that bush we're going to get attacked by a bunch of nasty things, people. So let's not go in there. Let's go somewhere else. Okay? Data will help us accomplish that. Another question you will say, or another response I would know I would have, because we had this in Scotland, by the way, was, yeah, but we've negotiated better terms. Absolutely true. And a real and important finding from the work that we've been doing in Scotland with 160-odd institutions of a variety of sizes and all the things I've already referred to, is that big isn't always best. A lot of innovation and a lot of the more interesting things that get accomplished actually come from the smaller organizations. A whole host of reasons why. Perhaps there's more room, more scope. You're less bound by, we've always done it this way. Who knows what the reason is? But actually, sometimes the smaller organizations do things better than the bigger organizations. Now, why in the context of cooperation wouldn't we allow for that fact? So if there is an organization that's done particularly well in a particular category, why do we not allow for that fact in the cooperation that then occurs? I leave that thought with you. There is a way, however, to stop the, yeah, but he said, she said, I said, I'm better than you, I'm bigger than you, data. Here's a hypothesis for you. We've done this, and I'm going to share the results with you in a second. How about if we go beyond the spend data that's been cleansed and classified and enriched with data from external sources, and then we fold in faculty or student data. And instead of looking at a category, an amount of spend, and going, well, I spend more than you, so therefore I'm better, or worse, what we do is we say, yeah, but how much do you spend per student, or per member of staff, or per part, whatever the metric happens to be. And some very interesting things occur when you do that. And remember, right at the front here, we were talking about hidden insight. Facts supported by evidence that we would not have known otherwise, but if we did know, it might change our view as to how we do something. So hypothesis 1 is that. What happens if we get data that describes the institution itself in terms of its academic makeup and faculty? Well, an interesting thing happens. What you actually create for each of the 566 categories is like a relative spend efficiency. I mean, that's the way probably to think about it. Now, it doesn't mean to say that one's better than others, but if someone is spending half of the benchmark average in a particular category relative to the number of students they have, there is a reason. Now, it could be they're just not spending enough, of course. But it could also be they figured out how to spend the right amount of money, and there could be learnings for everyone else from that one organization. If we then create an index from that, we can then compare and contrast against the index. In other words, what we can begin to do is put together a table that shows us individual entities and where they score better than their peers or higher than the benchmark average. I don't want to create something that's adversarial. And we can identify the. Now, I have to be a bit careful here because I've done this for the CSU campuses. Okay? And what it shows us, if I take 1 to 23, the blue bar indicates how many categories that campus appears as number 1 relative to our index. And what you see is that campus 1 is a couple of times, but campus 6, 4 times, campus 11, 4 times, 23, 6 times. So some campuses appear more often in the top 5 than others, and the relative positions vary by category. In other words, if we wish, and we're so motivated, we can also use spend data enriched with faculty and student data to help us navigate where best practice might be occurring. And that's a more democratic and I think more sensible way to focus on who might lead on a particular cooperative contract, where there might be opportunities for others to learn. And because this whole notion of cooperation and the journey that we went on with Scotland wasn't just about saving money, it was also about how can we do things better? And doing things better is often looking for examples of best practice elsewhere. And yeah, that's a good idea. Let's implement that. So, right back to where we started. If I do not know where I am, if I do not know where I am going, and I don't know what resources I have to get me there, I'm not likely to have a very successful journey. Might end up in a fun place. But that will be a little bit like my story I told you about my union. I ended up somewhere where I had no idea I'd end up, but it was interesting. But I hadn't planned to go there. I may be bribed to tell you what that was, by the way. So the right data, purposely analyzed, can help identify where you are. On and on and on and on and on. So, Bob the Builder. In my book, there's ample evidence to suggest that there is huge opportunity in front of you as a collective group when it comes to procurement and transforming the way you procure goods and services as a group. There is plenty of data and tools that would facilitate making the right choices at the right time, consistent with policy and best practice, all that sort of good stuff. So should we fix it? I think you got $1.9 billion worth of reasons for fixing it. Scotland decided all those years ago, now 8 years ago, to be saying I wanted a consistent cross-country visibility for all public sector. That was pretty far-sighted. In fact, we're in our 9th year now. $1.9 billion worth of opportunity. Similar amount of expenditure annually in Scotland as there is in the 3 systems assembled and represented here today. Should we fix it then? You don't have to answer that question. Whether you decide to fix it or not, the journey ahead of you will be interesting. And as someone who spent 10 years supporting folk just like you, I truly wish you the best of luck. The state of California needs you. By the way, there is no test. I lied. Any questions?
So you have done a little bit of analysis, and you've identified that there are a few of our campuses within the CSU system that we've got some best practices. How do we get the list of the best practices related to the different
You write me an enormous check.
categories?
Just write me a big check. I can be bribed. In all seriousness, that was an exploratory piece of work that we, with Mike and Tom, I just came up with an idea, because I've been doing some work actually in the UK on exactly this. This was just a thought. And we did some analysis in the UK, and it seemed to be a workable hypothesis. We then did some analysis specifically for you with the permission of Mike and Tom, but it was sort of handcrafted. So to turn it into something more meaningful and accessible by all organizations, we'd have some work to do. But if it was required that work was to be done, then we have the tools and the people and the resources to do it. So there'd be a bit of work to do, basically. Unless you bribe me and I give you the list I've already got, which case. Tom.
We have this large group of community colleges, and a few of them are represented here. And your hypothesis that the spend across community colleges and possibly the state colleges are quite similar.
Yeah, about $1 billion to 1.2, yeah, to CSU.
And the categorization of that spend is similar.
Yes.
In your opinion, how many community colleges in California would we have to perform a rudimentary level of spend analysis for to conclude that the community colleges in California are similar to the state colleges in California? Is that what representation would be required?
If you did that for the top 40 districts, bear in mind the data I had was just for districts, top 40 districts would give you 80% coverage of the spend, which in anyone's book would be more than adequate. If you wanted to push it and take it to 90 plus, you need to just go down to 50. So 50 of the 72 districts, but 40. You could probably argue that somewhere in a number below that, but if you want them to be able to use it subsequently, if it were finding the fact, then probably best to go to about 40 would be my instinct.
Thank you.
Have I stunned you into silence? Clearly, and I have finished early, which is unusual for me, but I did think that there was just it's too much of a good thing, right? Numbers, you don't really need that at this time of the morning. So if you are, I have a question.
So I'm interested in the data as it goes into the system. As someone who is very familiar with cleansing that data, as you would say, to make it all make sense. There's a lot that are just good old-fashioned errors, data input errors as you're keying something in. Where do you think the responsibility is? Is it more important for work to be done downstream to make sure that that data is cleaner as it goes in to understand it better with perhaps less sophisticated systems? Or do you think it's more important to just take it whatever its form and perform the work once it gets in?
Yeah, really good question, and I'm delighted to meet a kindred spirit. You therefore know how painful these things are to accomplish. I learned a new word, by the way, which I think is appropriate under the circumstances in the last few days, hot mess. I didn't know what that was. And I believe that might adequately describe most sources of data from most public institutions. However, walking into someone and saying, I want you to spend dollars on this problem is a challenge when it's data and it's ostensibly dull, however big or however hot the mess is. What you need to do is give them the ample business evidence, and the best way to do that is to take it as a mess, do the cleaning and classification, and accept it as a mess at source, do the work, show the results, deliver some result, evidence, And follow that by, oh, and we did even more if actually what we did was sort this out at source. Because if you sit here and the assumption is we want everyone to resolve their hot messes before we can start, we will still be having this conversation in 10, 15, 20, and in fact, if it was possible, long past our passing. So it's about being pragmatic and realistic, and we believe, and the work we've done says, ignore it, take it as it is, do something useful with it, and then show them the results of the useful thing you've done. And then you'll get the, I see why I need to fix it at source, and on it goes. Does that answer the question? Do we have any more? Tom?
I'd like to put, well, actually, put you on the spot and ask you to describe the work, because it's different. Describe the work that you did for the UK government around the not-for-profit firms. I think it's an example of how spend analytics or just business intelligence goes to solve a problem as opposed to deliver an ongoing program.
Happy to. Our focus for the last 10 years has been on spend analytics. And the reason we stay focused on that, we believe it's a good thing to be good at a good thing, and one thing, and do it exceptionally well, do it at the very best of your ability, and become very practiced and proficient at it. And every now and again, because we do stuff with data, and we've been doing stuff with data for 25 years, people come along and they go, oh, could you help me with this other problem? We'd always go, oh, no, we're busy with this spend analytics stuff. I can't. It's different. We were focused on this. And then I accidentally won a project with the Cabinet Office. And I say accidentally because what they did was they said, Luke, we know you guys know stuff about data. Can you help us with this problem? The government is particularly keen to figure out the way data and analytics can be used to reduce instances of grant fraud. Now you go, what's that got to do with spend data? So we went, oh, yeah, obviously you don't turn, the Cabinet Office is like your White House, it's the Prime Minister's like enforcers. So you don't really want to say, go away, I'm not interested. So the way you do that, by the way, is you write a proposal, and you write your proposal, and you just hope that they don't, maybe you do it at a reasonably full price. I'm giving you secrets here now, of course. Yeah, you did a reasonably full price, so what you're saying is no, thank you very much. But if they did come back and do it for you, at least you know your margins are reasonable. So we submitted the proposal. 6 weeks later, they rang us up and said, you got the work. And, oh no. Because we wanted to stay focused. However, we did the work. And so that work was creating from multiple sources of data, including spend data, because actually grant fraud and fraud occurs inside charitable institutions when they spend money. So there is a procurement link, right? There is vendors, and there's a whole bunch of it. I tell you what, I learned a fascinating ton of stuff about the whole business of how to commit fraud. So I was like, wow. Gee, this is a lot easier than working. However, what we were then able to do was to map and marry data that might indicate a fraudulent event, or in combination would indicate the possibility of a fraudulent event. And we built a system of indicators that were data-driven. There were 124 of them in total. And the purpose of the exercise was eventually that could be built into a traffic light system, ranked and scored, so that what you'd have is institutions of a particular interest. This is charitable institutions, by the way, not higher education institutions. Charitable institutions of particular interest, in other words, ones at the apex of this pyramid based upon their score from the indicators. You would have individuals inside that of particular interest, and then you actually would have individuals ineligible to act. But because of the way that the systems work at present, data about individuals who should not be acting as trustees, in other words, in a position of trust, doesn't get to the right place. So you had convicted fraudsters as trustees. And so we did have to do a bit of isn't a clue in the name? Maybe someone with obvious integrity issues should not be a trustee. In other words, it's about a business problem, and I think that's really where Tom was going. In other words, if you think about it, and you think about what it is you're trying to accomplish, and you work backwards from what you're trying to accomplish, to what it is you need to help you accomplish that, data will often appear as something that will give you an edge or an advantage. And in that particular, that's actually, what, by the way, that's why Xantica, the ancillary business, got started. Because once we'd done that piece of work, they asked for more. And then they asked for more. And then someone else asked us for something similar. So, and you can't, it's very difficult, by the way, to run a consulting business alongside a productized business, so we separated those two things out. I'm the one like this standing across the pair of the businesses, but there's a different bunch of people in each. Does that answer the, is that what you meant me to, that could have been completely not what Tom wanted me to talk about, but it was interesting for me, nonetheless, to share that with you. Okay. Any more questions? Yes.
You've talked about analyzing spend and categorizing spend, and you've obviously done that for a long time. In a case like this new issue, where you are, to some degree, breaking new ground, how do you consider what categorization system is appropriate?
Well, having done it for 10 years and over 3,000 data sets, we've actually developed our own system that is appropriate for the public sector. And so we don't need to get into discussion about what is or isn't the most appropriate. What we need is a standard way of doing things so you can compare things. So we use something called VICO, which we built ourselves. And so all the analysis I've been referring to in the categories are based upon that. The important thing is we can take any set of data. The assumption often is, oh, my data is so poor, there's nothing you can do with it. Dispel that notion. There is something can be done with it. We can certainly do something with it. All you need to be able to provide and really think about is my outcome, to go to Tom's point. What am I wanting to achieve? What questions do I need to ask that might help me toward achieving that? You know, how much do I spend, which categories, that sort of stuff. And the rest can be delivered to you without a lot of effort on your part. All we need to categorize to one of 566 categories is the amount of money that was paid, the date it was paid, the name of the vendor, and if you've got the address of the vendor, that's helpful too. That's it. So we're not, if you give us more, that's great, we can use it, but the bottom line is we never assume that is the case. Most folk, if I said that, who's in finance here today, by the way? Do we have folk in finance or finance systems? You know, guys, you'll know. If I just asked for that, just give me a list of the people you paid in the last 12 months, amount, date, name, that's not a difficult thing to produce, right? I'm looking at, why am I looking at you? I don't know, but you put your hand up, so I'm asking you that question. It's not difficult, you know, it's not difficult. Sometimes the procurement folk, of course, don't have access to the IT or the finance person who can do that for them, so they have to go, but we address them. So the bottom line, in answer to your question is, I wouldn't worry about that. I would think more about what you want to achieve, and then look to how you, and the questions you want to answer, less about how difficult it's going to be to get to that point.
What about non-spend data?
Well, we ask you in the first instance, we have a specification, we ask you in the first instance to exclude things that are easy to exclude, staff salaries. But then we also have, we have reference databases, $500 billion of reference data that allows us to identify payments made to entities that aren't what we call core trade. We know it's another public body, it's something. We also have over 400 checks that we make. So we work for the whole of the police forces, for example. They're very careful about what we have to screen in and out. So you might, and in fact, as a slight digression and anecdote, we once were actually delivered by police forces payments to informants. So we are used to dealing with these things, but what we're also able to do is to filter out all the stuff that's not relevant, because the important thing is to get down to how much did we spend externally on goods and services, and everything we do, and the focus is about taking a rough cut from you and then turning that into something that is exactly what I've just described. What?
I'm just curious if you could elaborate on what you just said, that the minimum data that you require is just their vendor name, address if possibly, the amount paid. How are you then able to extract that data by just vendor name into a categorization that you have put together? I mean, that's, I'm just curious who's actually doing that and what's the assumption?
If I told you, I'd have to kill you afterwards.
We share the same pain, so I'm just trying to understand.
It's method, process, data, and people and technology. It's a bunch of stuff. So we've been doing this for a long time. So in the public sector, we developed a way of adding real value to the raw data I've just described. And in essence, we start, if we know nothing else, with who the vendor is, and what that vendor does. And we use what that vendor does as a proxy for what you might be purchasing from them. Now, so in essence, that's where it starts. There's a ton more rounding in it to that. But what that means is we have a mix of systems that automate a lot of this. So things like, we've seen this vendor a million times before. We know who they are. We match it to our reference sources. We inherit classifications, a whole bunch of stuff like that. But you'll always get a whole bunch to spit out at the end, which we've not seen before, or we can't quite match quite as precisely to our reference data sets. In which case, we have people, they're called, we call them analysts. What they call themselves are eyeballers. What they're actually looking at is prioritized rank lists of unfounds. And we research them. So ultimately, and then a decision is made based on the taxonomy as to which category or classifier to put. And imagine a machine like a factory that takes hot mess in one end, right? And at the other end comes something that's clean, consistent, value-added, and fit for purpose. Is it everything you might want it to be? No, of course not. But it does the very best with so that's a very brief way to describe what actually is a very sophisticated process that uses other data to infer from what we know what it is we don't. I mean, that's pretty much the way that we do it. Any more questions, or because I'm on overtime, I'm not charging for this, so I want to go. No, I'm kidding.
Test. Actually, I have a question. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Actually, I do have a question here. Thank you. And you're right on topic, and this has been excellent. Now, we have talked about if we're going to go through this effort of looking at expenditures and all this, so we want to look for ways to actually improve and find best practices. And one of the other areas that's a part of this, and you haven't really talked about it, and that's that benchmarking between similar organizations. Uh-huh. And this is a part of what happens, and it's a part of us being public entities and that transparency. And so there has to be some transparency between the collaborating entities and a willingness to kind of let your data be out there. So can you speak to that?
Yeah, I can. I can also give you an interesting cultural observation. I've spent 5 years traveling backwards and forwards across the Atlantic. I'm probably now about mid-Atlantic. I'm not really a Brit anymore, but I'm certainly not an American yet. You haven't accepted me completely. Obviously, I'd have to change the way I speak. However, in the English public sector, the only thing they're interested in is not being last. Okay? So on that basis, they're not wanting anyone to illustrate in a table or a chart the fact that they are anything other than not last. So benchmarking in the UK public sector is an anathema. It's like everyone talks, the business people talk about it happening, but the actual people who will be subject to the benchmarks will avoid it like the plague. Here, you're interested in being first. That's a good thing in my book. So what that means is you start from the premise of, where am I? Because if I'm not first, I now know how far I've got to go before I get to where I want to get to. And so what that means is benchmarking is actually genuinely considered a way to drive improvement, not a way to get beaten over the head with a massive club. It can be that as well, of course, but you accept that. But the key thing with benchmarking is to be realistic about what is possible to accomplish. Because what you don't want to do is get up, is the first thing you do, present a bunch of benchmarks, and then have hands going up all over the place, yes, but. So your method's got to be sound. You absolutely have to make sure your method is sound, and your data has to be comparable. And the key about comparability is standardization. But right at the beginning, I said, I doubt very much that your data is standardized and consistent across systems, let alone inside systems. And actually even inside individual campuses, right? So the first thing you have to do is create a standard. Once you've created a standard, you generally do have a big bucket of apples. You can now begin to say, what if, and add in other data sources, and then you can do your comparison. So absolutely an important facet of this, but also something needs to be taken, the path trod a little carefully to ensure that what you end up with is something that's valuable and that doesn't actually create an argument. That
was right on. That was excellent. Mike? Thanks. Any other questions? Excellent. Thank you, Luke.
Okay. Well, listen, you have all been very helpful. I've enjoyed it.